Dean Martin reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. The Che Parade nightclub in Chicago was packed with 1,200 people. They'd paid good money to see the king of cool do what he did best: sing, joke, and make everything look effortless. But Dean wasn't smiling. He unfolded the paper slowly, deliberately. The audience thought it was part of the act. Some people started laughing. Then Dean began to read, "Don't go on stage tonight or you're a dead man." The laughter stopped. The room went completely silent. You could hear the ice shifting in glasses. Dean looked up from the note and scanned the crowd. His eyes moved methodically from table to table, searching for someone, searching for a face he'd been warned about. And then he said the words that would either save his life or end it right there on that stage. "Whoever wrote this, I got news for you. I'm already here. So if you got something to say to me, stand up and say it to my face." Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. And what happened in the next 15 minutes became the most dangerous performance of Dean Martin's life. To understand what happened that night in Chicago, you need to understand that Dean Martin wasn't just a singer. He was a fantasy. He was the guy every man wanted to be and every woman wanted to be with. Smooth, confident, untouchable. He sang love songs that made you believe in romance. He cracked jokes that made you feel like you were in on something special. And he did it all while looking like he'd just rolled out of bed and stumbled onto a stage. But that image, that carefully crafted persona, came with a price. Women fell in love with Dean Martin. Not the real Dean, but the idea of him. The man in the tuxedo who sang "That's Amore" and made you believe that love was simple, that romance was easy, that everything would be okay if you just had the right person. Some women confused the fantasy with reality. And when their marriages fell apart, when their lives didn't match the dream Dean sold from the stage, they blamed their husbands for not being Dean Martin, and some husbands blamed Dean. November 8th, 1963. Dean Martin was in Chicago for a 2-week engagement at the Che Parade, one of the most prestigious nightclubs in America. The Che Parade wasn't some dive bar. It was where the elite came to be seen. Politicians, business moguls, celebrities. The club had hosted everyone from Nat King Cole to Sammy Davis Jr. And now it was Dean's turn. Dean arrived at the club around 6 p.m. for his 9 p.m. show. He was traveling with a small crew. His road manager, a man named Lou Perry, his accompanist, Ken Lane, and a couple of security guys who were mostly there to keep overeager fans from mobbing him. Dean went straight to his dressing room. It was a nice room, by nightclub standards. A couch, a vanity with lights, a small bar. Dean poured himself a ginger ale. Despite his reputation as a drinker, Dean rarely touched alcohol. The tumbler of whiskey he carried on stage was usually apple juice. The whole drunk persona was an act. He was loosening his tie when he noticed the envelope on his vanity. It was plain, white, no name on it. Dean picked it up and turned it over. Someone had sealed it with tape. He tore it open and pulled out a single sheet of paper. The handwriting was shaky, almost violent. The letters were pressed so hard into the paper that you could see the indentations on the back. "Dean Martin, you don't know me, but you ruined my life. My wife left me because of you. She said I wasn't romantic enough, wasn't charming enough, wasn't you. She's gone now, and it's your fault. Don't go on stage tonight. If you do, you're a dead man. I'll be in the audience. You won't know which one is me, but I'll know where you are." Dean read it twice. Then he set it down on the vanity and stared at it. Lou Perry knocked on the door and walked in. He took one look at Dean's face and knew something was wrong. "What happened?" Dean handed him the note without a word. Lou read it, and his face went white. "Jesus Christ, Dean. We need to call the police." Dean shook his head. "No police." "What do you mean, no police?" "This guy is threatening to kill you. We cancel the show. We get security. We're not canceling the show," Dean said. His voice was calm, too calm. I'm going on stage. Lou stared at him like he'd lost his mind. Dean, listen to yourself. Some psycho thinks you stole his wife and he's threatening to shoot you. We cancel. We reschedule. We figure this out. But Dean was already making up his mind. He'd dealt with threats before. Angry husbands, jealous boyfriends, the mob. He'd learned a long time ago that if you showed fear, you were finished. And he wasn't about to start being afraid now. I'm not canceling, Dean said, but tell security to keep their eyes open. If they see anyone acting strange, anyone who looks off, they pull him out quietly. No scene. Lou wanted to argue, but he knew Dean well enough to know that once his mind was made up, there was no changing it. At 7:30 p.m., Dean was getting into his tuxedo when there was another knock. It was Ken Lane, his pianist. Ken was holding another envelope. This was taped to the piano, Ken said. His hand was shaking. Dean opened it. Same handwriting. Same violent scrawl. I'm here. I bought a ticket. Front row center. I want you to see my face when I do it. Last chance to save yourself. Don't go on stage. Dean crushed the note in his fist. He looked at Ken. You scared? Ken nodded. Yeah, Dean. I'm scared. Dean smiled. That makes two of us. But he didn't cancel. He didn't call the police. He just finished getting dressed. At 8:45 p.m., the club manager, a nervous man named Tony Scotto, came to the dressing room. Dean, I heard about the notes. We should cancel. We can refund tickets. Tell people you're sick. Dean was adjusting his bow tie in the mirror. How many people out there, Tony? Tony hesitated. Full house. 1,200. Dean nodded. Then we don't cancel. These people paid to see a show, and I'm going to give them one. But Tony couldn't let it go. Dean, what if he's serious? What if he really has a gun? Dean turned and looked at Tony. Then he'd better not miss. The thing about Dean Martin that most people didn't understand was that he genuinely didn't care about dying. Not in a suicidal way. He just had this deep belief that when your time was up, it was up. You couldn't hide from it. You couldn't negotiate with it. So why live in fear? He'd grown up in Steubenville, Ohio, surrounded by violence. His father had worked in a barber shop that was a front for illegal gambling. Dean had seen men beaten, men shot, men who thought they could control their fate and found out they were wrong. So if some heartbroken husband wanted to kill him over a marriage that had nothing to do with Dean, well, that was just bad luck. But Dean wasn't going to hide. He wasn't going to give this man the satisfaction of controlling him. At 9 p.m., the house lights dimmed. The band started playing Dean's opening music. The audience applauded. They were excited. They had no idea what was about to happen. Dean stood in the wings, looking out at the crowd. Lou Perry was next to him, scanning the front rows with binoculars. You see anyone suspicious? Lou shook his head. Could be anyone, Dean. We have no idea what this guy looks like. Dean took a deep breath. Then I guess we're about to find out. He walked on stage to thunderous applause. The spotlight hit him, and he smiled. That easy, confident smile that made everything seem like it was going to be okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Chez Paris. We've got a great show for you tonight. But his eyes were scanning the front row, looking for someone who didn't fit, someone who wasn't smiling, someone who looked like he had nothing to lose. And then Dean saw him, front row, dead center, just like the note said. A man in his mid-40s, heavyset, wearing a cheap suit that didn't match the expensive crowd around him. His face was red. His jaw was clenched. His hands were gripping the edge of the table so hard, his knuckles were white. And he was staring at Dean Martin with pure hatred. Dean stopped talking mid-sentence. The audience noticed. Some people turned to see what he was looking at. The man in the front row didn't move. He just stared. Dean made a decision. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the crumpled note. He unfolded it slowly. The audience was confused. This wasn't part of the act. Dean never used props. He never read from anything. "Folks," Dean said, his voice carrying through the silent room, "I want to share something with you." He cleared his throat and began to read. "Don't go on stage tonight or you're a dead man." The audience gasped. Someone screamed. The band stopped playing. Every eye in the room was on Dean Martin. He looked up from the note, and his eyes locked on the man in the front row. The man's face had gone from red to white. He looked like he might throw up. Dean continued reading. "I'll be in the audience. You won't know which one is me, but I'll know where you are." Dean folded the note and put it back in his pocket. Then he walked to the edge of the stage. He was standing directly above the man who had threatened to kill him. The security guards were moving toward the front row, but Dean held up his hand. "Stop. Let him stay." The room was so quiet, you could hear the ventilation system humming. Dean looked down at the man. "You wrote this, didn't you?" The man's lips were trembling. He tried to speak, but nothing came out. Dean's voice was gentle, almost kind. "Stand up." The man didn't move. "I said stand up," Dean repeated. Louder this time. Slowly, the man stood. He was shaking. Tears were streaming down his face. The entire audience was watching him, judging him, pitying him. Dean looked at him for a long moment. Then he spoke. "What's your name?" The man's voice was barely a whisper. "Robert. Robert Henley." "Robert," Dean said. "You think I ruined your marriage?" Robert nodded, unable to speak. Dean leaned forward slightly. "Let me tell you something, Robert. I'm a guy who sings songs. That's all I am. I'm not a marriage counselor. I'm not a relationship expert. I'm just a guy with a decent voice who gets paid to entertain people for a couple hours." He paused. "If your wife left you, it wasn't because of me. It was because something was broken between you two that had nothing to do with Dean Martin." Robert was openly sobbing now. I just wanted her to look at me the way she looked at you on TV." Dean's expression softened. "I got news for you, pal. The guy you see on TV, he's not real. He's a character I play. My real life isn't romantic songs and perfect moments. It's arguments and bills and trying to figure out how to be a halfway decent father to my kids." The audience was completely silent. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was something raw, something real. Dean continued. "You came here tonight thinking you wanted to hurt me, but I don't think that's what you really wanted. I think you wanted someone to blame, someone to be angry at, because being angry is easier than being sad." Robert collapsed back into his chair, his face in his hands. Dean straightened up. He looked at the security guards. "Get him some water, and call his family. Make sure he gets home safe." Then Dean looked back at Robert. "You're not going to hurt me, are you, Robert?" Robert shook his head violently. No. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Dean nodded. "I believe you." He turned back to the audience. The room was still frozen. Nobody knew what to do. Nobody knew what to say. Dean walked back to center stage. He picked up the microphone. His hands were steady, but there was something different in his eyes, something vulnerable that the audience had never seen before. "Folks, I'm going to be honest with you. My heart is beating about 200 miles an hour right now. I'm not as cool as I look." A few nervous laughs from the audience. "But I'm going to finish this show, because that's what I do, and because I think we could all use a little music right now." He nodded to the band. They started playing "Everybody Loves Somebody." Dean began to sing. His voice was strong, clear, but there was something different about it tonight. There was emotion in it, real emotion, not the smooth, practiced delivery he usually gave. This was Dean Martin singing like his life depended on it. The audience was transfixed. They weren't watching Dean Martin the performer. They were watching Dean Martin the man. Robert Henley sat in the front row, crying quietly. Security guards stood nearby, but they didn't remove him. Dean had told them not to. Dean sang for 90 minutes. He sang every song on his set list. He told his jokes. He interacted with the audience. But there was something different about the performance. It was more honest, more vulnerable, less of a show and more of a confession. When he finished, the audience gave him a standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes. After the show, Dean went back to his dressing room. He was exhausted. Not physically, emotionally. Lou Perry knocked and entered. "That was the bravest thing I've ever seen," Lou said. Dean shook his head. "Wasn't brave. I was terrified the whole time." "Then why did you do it?" Dean thought about it for a moment. "Because hiding wasn't going to solve anything. If that guy really wanted to hurt me, he'd have found a way. But I thought maybe, if I talked to him, human to human, I could get through to him." "Did it work?" Dean shrugged. "I'm still alive, aren't I?" There was a knock at the door. A police officer entered. "Mr. Martin, we took Mr. Henley in for questioning. He's not being charged with anything. We think he needs psychiatric help more than jail time." Dean nodded. "Make sure he gets it." The officer hesitated. "Sir, what you did tonight, reading that note on stage, confronting him like that could have gone very badly." Dean smiled, but it didn't. After the officer left, Dean sat alone in his dressing room. He pulled out the crumpled note and read it one more time. Then he tore it into pieces and threw it in the trash. The next night, Dean performed again at the Chez Paris. The show was sold out. Word had spread about what happened. People wanted to see the man who had stared down a death threat and turned it into a moment of human connection. Robert Henley wasn't in the audience. He was in a hospital, getting the help he needed. But years later, he would write a letter to Dean Martin. In it, he apologized again. He thanked Dean for not having him arrested. He said that night had been a turning point for him. He'd gotten help. He'd started rebuilding his life. Dean kept that letter in his office for the rest of his life. The story of what happened at the Chez Paris on November 8th, 1963, became legend. Different versions spread through Chicago. Some said Dean had pulled a gun on the man. Others said the man had actually fired a shot that missed. None of those versions were true. The truth was simpler, but in some ways more extraordinary. A man in pain had threatened to kill Dean Martin. And instead of hiding, instead of calling the police, instead of canceling the show, Dean had confronted him with compassion. He'd shown the audience, and the man who threatened him, that the person on stage wasn't a fantasy. He was real, flawed, human, and scared. But he'd also shown them something else. That courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what needs to be done despite the fear. Dean Martin never talked much about that night. When reporters asked him about it, he'd shrug it off. "Just another show in Chicago," he'd say. Nothing special. But those who were there knew better. They'd witnessed something rare, a moment when the mask slipped, when the cool, untouchable Dean Martin revealed the terrified but determined man underneath. And they'd seen that man choose kindness over self-preservation. That's the real story of the night Dean Martin got a death threat before his show and read it on stage. No gunfight, no dramatic escape. Just one man's decision to meet violence with empathy, to meet hatred with understanding. Years later, Ken Lane, Dean's pianist who was on stage that night, was asked what he remembered most about that performance. He said he remembered the silence, the way 1,200 people held their breath while Dean confronted a man who wanted to kill him, and he remembered Dean's hands, how they shook slightly as he held that note, how they steadied when he began to sing. He remembered that Dean Martin, the king of cool, was just as scared as everyone else in that room. He was just brave enough not to let it stop him.